Hi everyone. So the first book reading session of the book club, and I've decided to pick one of my favorite books in batch. This is what it looks like. It is Batch Flower Remedies for Women, a women's guide to the healing benefits of the batch remedies by Judy Ramsel Howard. It was one of my first few books in batch remedies, and it was gifted to me by my teacher Angela Davis. And it's very, very special to me because, the heading says, it's batch remedies for women. I've read quite a few bits and pieces of this book, and it's brilliant. It's come handy to me in times of need. I resonate with it to a very large extent, and I hope you love it and enjoy it. Whenever that life gets back to normal and you can pick a copy for yourself, please do order it. It's available on Amazon. It's got several chapters and very different contents, but I want to begin with the introduction and to talk a little bit about who the author is, because to give her the due respect and so that you really know who Judy Howard is and why she's really come up with this book. And Judy, if you ever get a chance to see this video, thanks a lot for giving this book to us. So the introduction goes, in writing this book, I hope to give to women the opportunity to find a way through their own personal milestones of female development by coping with and acting positively upon the emotional aspects of their troubles with the gentle healing benefits of the batch flower remedies. These remedies are intended to restore our balance and equilibrium by guiding us through the negative feelings we experience and showing us the light again, so often at the end of a long dark tunnel. The batch remedies are safe and are helpful to everyone, adults, children, even animals and plants, selected always for the person as an individual rather than for any particular physical complaint. Dr. Batch, the Harley Street physician who discovered the batch remedies during the 1930s, believed and proved to himself through extensive medical and personal research that our emotional outlook and personality was ultimately responsible for our overall mental and physical well-being. His system of healing, therefore, is intended to treat the person rather than the disease, and therefore the cause rather than the effect. The batch flower remedies are for everyone, but can be of particular help to women because from puberty onwards, throughout a woman's reproductive life, and indeed beyond, her life is so often at the mercy of her hormones and all associated emotional changes that she has to cope with. Isn't that so true? Rather like a roller coaster, we step out at puberty and then finally get off when we reach the menopause, but its effects can go on long after the ride has finished. This book is designed to consider each stage of a woman's life cycle and how the batch remedies can help ease the emotional traumas that can make those stages so trying. About the author, Judy Howard trained as a general nurse at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Kings Lynn, Norfolk. After qualifying in 1980, she took a staff nurse post in the operating theatre and then gained further experience as an agency nurse in Bristol, London. In 1982, she qualified as a midwife at the Whittington Hospital in North London and then took up a position as a secretarial and nursing assistant to a Harley Street gynecologist, obstetrician, and fertility specialist of very high regard. During that time, she undertook successfully a course in family planning and then in 1983 moved to Nottingham, where she qualified as a health visitor and worked in the mining town of Ollerton until 1985, when she was asked if she might like to join the team at the Bat Centre. Her father, John Ramsel, had been working with Nora Weeks and Victor Bullen at Mount Vernon since 1971, and so it was a natural progression that she would join her father and felt deeply privileged to have been offered such an opportunity. Her role at the Bat Centre is, along with the other members of the team, to educate and offer advice about the work of Dr. Batch and to run the teaching and training program of the Dr. Edward Batch Foundation, the educational wing of the Bat Centre. During the summer months, she and her colleagues are busy preparing the mother tinctures, the life force and essence of the batch flower remedies. She says, "It is a great honor to be so closely involved with the work of a wonderful yet immensely humble man, to be at Mount Vernon, his home and workplace, to sit and wander in the peaceful garden bursting with life, and to have by my side not only my dear parents, but my husband Keith and my friend Chris, whom I have known since 1977, when we met as two young, hopeful student nurses embarking on a further career together. Each day, as I walk up the steps to the front door of the cottage, I most certainly count my blessings. Absolutely written by the heart. I've had the privilege of meeting Judy, and she's a wonderful, wonderful person. So, the next chapter says how the BAT system works. The batch flower remedies are intended to treat the person as an individual for the temperament and personality. They are not a treatment for physical complaints, but because our body responds either positively or negatively to the way we think and feel in ourselves, by helping us feel more positive, our body has a chance to respond equally positively and thus re-establish a general betterment in our being as a whole. There are several books available which explain the remedies and their uses in more detail. They are listed at the end of the book. There is a good comprehensive list available even online, and most of those books are on Amazon. And as and when I have more videos that come out with our book club, I'm sure you'll get a list of all these books. Right. So moving on, there is a list of remedies here with one line indication of each remedy. But I think the first chapter is very interesting. It's a women's view of herself, so which is what I'm going to read for today. Right. Let us begin by considering our body, our looks and figure. Women come in all shapes and sizes, short, tall, petite, heavy, flat-chested, to name but a few. As young children, shape and size seems to matter very little. Friendship and therefore personality is, by and large, the important issue. Children who are good at games, funny, extrovert, and friendly tend to be more popular ones at school. Appearances seem to become more important as the child gets older, and there is then a need for the individual to belong and fit in. Collectively, children often tend to single out a misfit in the class or school. A child who seems different, therefore, stands out from the rest. Being too fat or too thin, too unkempt or too smart, too bright or too slow, anything that makes a child the odd one out. For whatever reason, children are snubbed. They are faced with having to either accept it and put up with the teasing and friendlessness, or try to win the favor of their peers by proving that they're worth knowing. This might rest with achievement at sport, or by making everyone else laugh, or by organizing a prank, or being the life and soul of the classroom. The other children will then be more interested in the personality of the child and forget about what may otherwise have been the subject of ridicule. As we move out in our teens, appearances tend to become more important. Adults generally appreciate that there is more to a person than what is first seen, but it is not until we really get to know a person that a true opinion can be formed. Sometimes there is a temptation to make up our minds at first glimpse, just judge a person. And this frequently happens when being introduced to a prospective new boyfriend, meeting someone new at a party or nightclub, or going on a blind date. Most people, I'm sure, will be able to recall some incident or occasion when they have taken an instant dislike to someone, having based their opinion on appearances alone. I can remember as a teenager being very fussy about the looks of the boys I went out with, and I'm sure there are many women who, like me, have danced with a seemingly handsome man in a dimly lit discotheque, and then, although perhaps ashamed to admit it, feeling utterly disappointed when the lights were switched on at the end of the evening. Thankfully, as we grow up and become adults, we begin to take more notice of what lies beneath the surface and less of what is superficial. Nevertheless, often we have a preconceived idea of what our ideal partner should look like, and this can get in the way of our appreciation of a person's finer qualities or prevent us really getting to know them properly. Beauty is, after all, only skin deep, and if we would just take the trouble to look inside and explore, we might find a host of hidden treasures that are much more beautiful and that will radiate through the outer casing given the chance. I so agree. I think this reminds me of my college time when um, the instinct of making friends, or the instant decision of making friends, was based on how good or how presentable the opposite person looked. And then when, perhaps the less popular person becomes your friend and you get to know that person, you realize, oh, after all, he wasn't really that bad, or she wasn't really that bad. In fact, the inner attributes are so much more than just what you see on the outer layer. When we consider how we perceive other people, it is easier to understand how we perceive ourselves. The reason for self dissatisfaction, vanity, self approval, or disapproval becomes clearer. Often, the same criteria we use to measure the standards of others apply to self examination, and so we may find that we criticize others for what we do not like in ourselves, so much like the shadow self. This applies to physical appearance as well as to faults in the character. It is, however, regard for oneself that matters when it comes to enjoying life in uninhibited. If we have a positive regard for ourselves, then we feel comfortable with our being and can get on with living, unhindered by self absorbing thoughts about what other people might think of us. This is often easier said than done, however, and for most women, there is usually something they dislike about themselves or have a hang up about. Whether it's noticeable or not, and inevitably, there will be someone else who would consider it a blessing to be endowed with such faults. If we could swap features like we might swap stamps, perhaps we would all be happy, or perhaps not. Come what may, we do what we can to enhance what we do have. Wearing flattering clothes, makeup, or adopting a new hairstyle are all ways and means of making us feel better, and are as much for our own benefit as for that of others. Looking good makes us feel good, and when we feel good, we feel happy. It is therefore therapeutic to take an interest in ourselves, and so a little self indulgent pampering once in a while by treating oneself to a day at a health and beauty club is tremendously revitalizing experience and can truly work wonders. Oh, I totally agree. I think I can relate to it at this very moment. If I had to look at myself this morning when I was doing my household chores, I think I had a very different face and a very different appearance. The minute I thought about doing a book reading session, I was trying to look my best in whatever way that I can look in this lockdown. But yes, I must admit, just maybe doing up my hair a little or taking a look at my face and doing it up a little, that makes me feel good, makes me feel fresh, and also it's encouraging to know that I will have an audience eventually who's going to listen or read along with me while I read this book. So yes, I think treating yourself and pampering yourself is very, very, very important. To be acceptable to ourselves, therefore, is a good reason for attending to physical appearance. But would we always take so much trouble if we lived in isolation, far away from anyone like a recluse? Would it matter then what we look like? Who would see? Most women in this situation would probably stop wearing makeup, choose to wear comfortable clothes without thinking about coordinating outfits or worrying about how well the colors matched, or for that matter, whether they had even been ironed. Some women, on the other hand, would make sure they looked immaculate no matter what, either to satisfy their own needs or just in case they had an unexpected visitor, like I have you. On the whole, it would seem that our personal appearance matters the most when there is someone else to appreciate it. It may be those who feature strongly in our lives, a boyfriend, husband, lover, for example, or because we want to indicate a position of authority or look efficient. Of course, we do not always try to look good for men. Women dress up for other women too. Fashion itself provokes competition. By and large, we tend to want to project an image or recognition for other people to see, no matter who they are. But at the end of the day, we judge ourselves. How we look either meets with our own approval or it does not. Well, I think it's brilliantly written, and It's strange that I have to pick this book up as the first one in this time of quarantine and lockdown. Just a few thoughts after reading that, really. While I was thinking about doing this book club and the reading sessions, a lot of days just got wasted because I wasn't looking the best. My hair was all over the place. I haven't gone to a salon in days. And, as a woman, I don't know whether it's the pressures by society or man has made it this way for eons now, but a man can look the way he wants to. He can look shabby, he can carry a stubble, he can have messy hair. Doesn't matter. Really doesn't matter. He's not really judged that often. Maybe some men are very particular, and I think I love that quality. But as women, most of us, I think 95% of women are expected to look presentable. They're expected to look good. And as much as I wanted to do a reading session, I kept thinking, oh, I'm not looking good today. My eyebrows are not done. I don't have makeup. My hair's messy. It's dry. It's, ruffled up. I don't have an iron t-shirt. And like Judy's clearly written that, it does not even matter whether the clothes are ironed or color coordinated. If it even makes sense, to be very honest, I'm sitting in my home shorts today. But yeah, what matters is the t-shirt that you can see. But I think in all of that, one thing that really stands out for me is, and I often say this to my clients also, that it doesn't matter whom you dress up for. It doesn't matter who's taking a look at you. Because then, if that becomes important, you will always depend on that person's judgment of you. Yeah, if I'm waiting for my boyfriend to approve of me, if I'm waiting for my colleagues to approve of me, if I'm waiting for my siblings, my family to say I'm looking good, I will always wait for their validation. It will not be important what I think really of myself. And that is the most important bit. I think what is important is what you think of yourself. Do you think you're pretty enough? Then no matter what, you will always remain pretty. So yes, do get up, dress up, wear that perfect dress, wear that makeup, but don't wait for somebody else's judgment. Look at yourself and say, hey, you know what? You look pretty. You look good, and that is what matters. That one person will always count and will always matter till the end. So girls, just dress up for yourself, get ready. I know we're all sitting at home, we're all in a lockdown. Just take that time off. I know you're working, I know you're cooking, you're cleaning. Just get up in the morning, have a bath, think you're going for your office, dress up, look your best, and then see how that makes you feel. I'm going to read the next line as well, the next chapter really. It says, a body, a figure, and dieting. A favorite topic, isn't it? We all have at some point of time tried to get onto some diet or the other. Very few women are completely satisfied with their figure. Someone who is thin may envy those who are more rounded, and likewise, those with fuller figures may give anything to be thin. Or there may be just one part of the body that we dislike. Perhaps our thighs seem a little too chunky, or our bust too small or too large. Some women pursue a surgical approach to reduce their fatty areas, or to change the shape of their nose or size of the breasts. Cosmetic surgery, however, is not always related to vanity. There are occasions when it is done to improve the quality of a person's life due to a disfigurement, for example, that causes a great amount of distress, and this could apply to anything from a bad scar to protruding ears. Cosmetic surgery, however, is an extreme measure in most instances. Where weight is concerned, prevention is undoubtedly better than cure. And although it is a lot easier said than done, if it can be controlled, then the unpleasant side effects associated with obesity will not occur. Food is the body's fuel. We need it to enable our organs to function properly, to give us energy that we can live healthily. What our body needs, however, and what it gets are two different things, and do not by any means always coincide. The body needs a well-balanced diet, one that contains a proportion of protein, carbohydrates, fats, and fiber, together with an adequate intake of all the essential vitamins and minerals. It is the right proportion of each one that is for a lot of people difficult to achieve. Energy is measured in calories, the unit value given to food. Those which provide calories in high proportions and thus foods which will readily be converted and used for energy are carbohydrates, starches, sugars, and fats. If the calorific intake is greater than the body's energy requirements, the excess will be stored as fat. Some women use energy at a faster rate than others and thus require more calories than those who have a slower metabolism. Similarly, women who take a lot of physical exercise or who are working in a job that involves a lot of walking, nurses, policewomen, traffic wardens, etc., will also require a diet that will provide more energy than those in more sedentary occupations. However, the brain uses a vast amount of energy, and so a person who works at a desk involved in mentally taxing work may be using up more energy than someone who has a more physically demanding occupation. If the diet is well balanced, consuming fattening foods in moderation in proportions suited to our own needs, and taking plenty of fresh raw foods, fruit, and vegetables, there should be no need for any of us to embark on a specific weight loss program. If a person is overweight, then apart from certain endocrine disorders which would require specialized treatment, it is usually due to either overeating or lack of exercise, and both cases are correctable with a little or perhaps a lot of motivation. In most instances, attention in both areas is required. For those who do need to lose weight, dieting should be taken gradually. It is no use going on a crash diet that will shed the excess weight too quickly, because although in the short term it makes one feel pleased and gives encouragement, it invariably causes the body to clamp down. I so agree. If a dramatically reduced diet is forthcoming, then suddenly, sorry, I think I skipped a line there. If a dramatically reduced diet is forthcoming, then the body, having been used to a greater quantity of food, suddenly finds itself having to draw on its store of fat for conversion to energy, no longer being able to rely on the food intake to cater for its needs. This brings about the initial speedy reduction in weight, but once the body has got over the shock of being caught unaware, it puts on the brakes. Metabolism slows down and the body begins to hold on its reserves, finding a way to utilize only the food that is provided for essentials and so preserving its store. I'll quickly give an explanation to that. Well, being a paramedic myself, I understand the body anatomy and nutrition a little bit. So, what happens is you're used to a certain kind of a diet and your body's pretty comfortable with it. So you may be eating your chips and pizzas and burgers and fries and your regular food, and your body knows that every day it's getting a certain supply of food. So it's pretty happy utilizing what it gets. And then suddenly you realize, oh my god, I've put on a lot of weight. And then you hear about the keto diet, you hear about the fasting diet, you hear about all sorts of fads, and you get onto a diet suddenly and your body goes through a shock. So imagine if your body is really thinking, which it does, it's saying, oh my god, so I am not getting the regular supply of food. So what is happening? And I'm using my energy, I'm metabolizing it faster, and yes, I do see a certain drop of weight because suddenly the intake of food is reduced and I'm trying to utilize everything that I get that my body consumes. So to run, to walk, to any effort that I take in any physical activity, I'm going to start using up the energy that my food provides, so I metabolize it faster. And then my body starts getting used to that. And then eventually I realize, as a body, I realize that, oh my god, I am not going to get my favorite items. So how about just storing everything she feeds me? So if she suddenly is going to feed me little amount in every 2 hours, I'd rather stock it up. I will not utilize it because I'm not going to get my favorite food again. And then that stocked up food gets converted to fat. And then you again start putting on weight. It is this compensatory action that slows down the weight loss. And although an even further reduction in food consumption will inevitably win the battle, it can only be temporary because as soon as normal eating habits are resumed, the body's own survival instincts come into play. And as a defense, it begins to build up an even bigger store of reserve energy than ever before. As a result, The weight gain, unless it is closely monitored, will become even greater, resulting in the disheartening realization that there has been a big step forward but two even bigger steps back. It is therefore essential when embarking on a weight loss program to not only take regular exercise to force the body to draw on its energy resources, but to diet gently and gradually. It will take longer, but will be far more effective in the long term. If you feel impatient with the slow process, impatience is the remedy to help. If you feel discouraged having suffered a setback or feel disheartened and unsuccessful, then gentian will give you the encouragement to persevere with restored optimism. Gorse will restore hope if you feel totally pessimistic. For those who know they should lose weight but keep putting it off and tell themselves as they tuck into another slice of cake, I'll start my diet tomorrow. Hornbeam is the remedy to ensure that tomorrow does actually come, so you stop procrastinating. If you have had several attempts but have reverted back to old eating habits and consequently put on excess weight again, then chestnut bud would be helpful, as this will help you to learn from your experience and to use it to remind you if you should drift into temptation too frequently. Dieting can, however, become an obsession, and this applies to those who really need to lose weight as well as those who need to lose very little, if at all any. It is the poor self image which stimulates the desire to improve one's looks by dieting. But it can be taken to extremes and may cause, in some women, an obsessional neurosis, whereby they do not see themselves as they really are, but as an ugly, out of shape, and a grotesque figuration of their true being. Crabapple is a remedy to deal with such feelings, as it helps to improve that self-image. Helps you to respect and like yourself so that you can look in the mirror and feel comfortable with what you see, instead of disgust at some distorted reflection. Rock water is also a helpful remedy to consider for the rigidity of the strict regime and unbending self-denial. There may also be a great lack of self-confidence for which larch would be indicated. Anorexia is commonly interpreted as the slimmer's disease. This is a slightly misleading notion because although it can be caused by overzealous dieting, which gets out of control, it is not by any means always the case. Many women suffering with this condition do not have a weight problem, but simply do not like themselves or have a desire to punish themselves for some reason. Again, crabapple is a remedy to help there. There are others who find food repellent or dirty and cannot bear to eat it. This again would be indicative of crabapple for the sense of contamination. Holly may also help, as often there is a suspicion of what damage the food might do or of the motives of the person who has prepared it. There may be a guilt at being such as nuisance, in which case pine would be called for. In fact, there could be numerous reasons, most of which are deep-rooted, and so careful and delicate counseling is needed to help the sufferer open up sufficiently to enable the current selection of remedies to be made. The above condition is anorexia nervosa, but there is a sister condition called anorexia bulimia, where food may be taken in secret binges and then afterwards, when a feeling of self-disgust becomes overwhelming, the food is vomited. Once again, it is the cause that are more important as far as the bachelor remedies are concerned, but as with anorexia nervosa, there tends to be a great deal of self-hatred, self-disgust, and self-punishment, for which crabapple is the remedy. However, although in a number of cases the casual focus is on oneself, it may be quite the reverse. It may be due to deep-seated resentment or hatred of other members of the family, parents, guardians, for example, and the self-destructive behavior is performed as a means of expressing that anger. Holly is the remedy for this hatred, or willow for resentment. Holly would also help ease feelings of jealousy due to sibling rivalry, for example. There is another group of people who may suffer with either complaint, who have suffered some sort of emotional trauma in a fundamental relationship with their parents, and who have, as a result, so little self-confidence or self-worth that they subconsciously draw attention to themselves through self-inflicted injury by focusing on their eating habits in an attempt to gain attention and compensate for the devotion and love that is missing. Star of Bethlehem is the remedy to help ease that sense of loss. Chicory for holding on, possessiveness, and needing attention. Cerato for those who seek reassurance from others. Willow for those who dwell on their misfortune and unhappy circumstances. Heather for self absorption. For those who hide the way they feel or try to hide their wasted body, agrimony is a valuable remedy to ease their inner pain and torture. For those who are afraid of food, Mimulus would help, or rock rose if there is an actual terror. Eating a meal in front of other people can also be extremely traumatic. Larch would give more confidence to those who feel self-conscious about eating in public. Pine is the remedy to help those who feel guilty about not being able to finish their meal, and Mimulus for those who develop a fear of eating at all. This aspect alone may get out of proportion, and a dread of choking, for example, may follow. Rock rose would help ease such a terrifying ordeal because so many different remedies may be indicated. It is therefore extremely important that the personality of the individual is taken into account. As with any other problem, as far as the batch remedies are concerned, one cannot generalize, and so although there may be common features in a number of people suffering with either anorectic condition, there are always reasons and emotions individual to each one, and so each case must be assessed accordingly. Our figure and our looks are central to the way we view ourselves. They are what give us confidence and self-assurance. However, it is not only our size or shape that matters. Whilst getting ready for work or to go out, the sense of not feeling right is a familiar one to most women. When the clothes we put on look drab or inappropriate, it makes us feel uncomfortable. Some mornings, looking in the mirror, one's face might look fresh and wide-eyed and would pass happily without makeup. Yet other mornings, one looks in the same mirror and sees a blotchy skin, saggy cheeks, puffy eyes, and would not even consider walking out of the door barefaced. I've faced that. At times like these, other women who always seem to look good whatever they wear, hair shiny, posture well balanced, eyelashes long and dark, seem infinitely more attractive. It is, however, all relative, for what is one woman's downfall is another woman's virtue, and there are unseen qualities to make up for any physical imperfections. A sense of humor, gentleness, kindliness, and a warm smile are aspects of beauty that go far deeper than an unblemished skin or trim figure, and far longer lasting than those applied with a makeup brush or tube of hair color. These aspects of a woman's being are what brings her to life, and ultimately what others are attracted to. The substance of the cake itself, not just its icing. Well, it was a nice read. What do you think? Do leave your comments on the book and the chapters that I read. If there's anything you want me to do differently, please voice it out. If there's anything you really like, everyone likes compliments, so please do let me know. And I shall use them in my next video. I might read a few more chapters from this one. I shall pick another book. If there is a book you have in mind, do leave me the name and I shall try and get hold of it. Till then, cheerio. And enjoy being a woman. You are beautiful no matter what size, what shape, what color, no matter what your eyes look like. They're always beautiful because they see beauty in others. So hang in there, stay home, stay safe, and happy quarantine period.